Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We're about to start. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Adiano, and I serve as the Dean of Enrollment Management here at Pima Community College. We're super excited today to have you all join us, and we're also very excited to share our draft versions of the Strategic Enrollment Management Plan and our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion plans with you. And before we get started, we do have an exciting morning ahead of us, but I do want to share some housekeeping items with you all. And so this is an in-person and live event. For our in-person guest, restrooms are located to the east and south of this room. For our virtual guest, please use the chat function to reach out to your facilitator if you have any questions or concerns. In-person guests can view the agenda by scanning the QR code on your documents. And finally, refreshments are going to be located in the back, and at the conclusion of the event, we will have lunch provided. And so now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Hilda Ladner, who's going to share some important acknowledgements with us.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Hilda Ladner. I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer here at Pima Community College. And I just want to welcome all of you that are here with us in person and everyone that is with us online. We're so happy to have you and excited to get your input on the priorities that we've worked on over the last year or so. Before I start with, well, let me do our land acknowledgement first. As we get started, I want to make sure that we set things in context for the work that we are doing today, for the discussions that we're going to have. And so I want to start with this land acknowledgement. Pima Community College is on the original homelands of the Tohono O'odham people and the Pascua Yaqui, who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. The practice of acknowledging the land of these sovereign nations brings to the forefront their enduring connection to this land, regardless of historical and current colonization practices. Let's acknowledge that we all benefit from these lands on which we work and learn. I encourage each participant today to learn about the land we inhabit, the tribal communities connected to this land, and the ways in which these two plans, our strategic enrollment and diversity, equity, and inclusion plans, can contribute to restorative practices related to land and community. And I'd also like to do a acknowledgement of the Black diaspora. If you could please advance the slide for me. Thank you. So we recognize and acknowledge that the very foundation of the United States of America was built on the free and forced labor of Black people of the African diaspora and Black people indigenous to this land. This foundation has generational and exponential effects that continue to negatively impact Black communities today and remain uncompensated. The historical and contemporary contributions of the Black diaspora continue to shape American culture and benefit all inhabitants of this land. So thank you for listening to that. Please take it in, think about this context as we think about our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan. So today, we're here to talk about these priorities. But before I get started, I have a couple of people that would like to provide a welcome. First, I want to acknowledge that our chancellor is here. We hadn't expected that he would be able to join us, so we're really happy to have you. And I don't know if you'd like to just say a greeting to everyone.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, Hilda, and I'll just keep this very brief because David's going to deliver the welcome on behalf of the college. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for your well wishes. As you all know, my father passed away recently, and I just want to thank all of you because the outpouring from the faculty, staff, and administrators was just overwhelming. So I really, really appreciate that. And I'm just excited that we can share with you some of the great work that's been going on to culminate into what you're going to be part of this morning. So thank you. Thank you, Hilda.
Thank you so much, Chancellor. Again, we're really glad that you could be with us today. This is important work that we know that you support. And so as we continue, I'd like to welcome up our President of Campuses, Dr. David Duray, to provide remarks and a welcome.
Thank you, Hilda, and thank you, Lee. And I just, on behalf of our Board of Governors and the entire college, really want to welcome you to this dialogue this morning, and really thank you for being here. Our community engagement is absolutely critical to everything that we're doing here at Pima. And so as we move forward with various plans, we want our community engagement and we want your input. So this will be really, really important today. And I have on here to welcome special people. Everybody's special here, so I want to welcome everybody. But I do want to introduce a couple of people. I want to introduce Marcy Euler, who's the president of our foundation. And I want to introduce our provost and executive vice chancellor, Dr. Dolores Duran-Cerda. Thank you. And I want to, first of all, this is the culmination, as David said, of these drafts. This is the culmination, really, of work we've been doing since the fall. So we've had a lot of engagement internally, and now we're really looking for our external partners to really weigh in on these plans. And I want to kind of frame, both the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan and our strategic enrollment plan. There really is an intersectionality of these because of our community and the goals that we really set for ourselves. We have, as part of our goals, we have a goal to double the completer counts of our Hispanic or Latino, Native American, and Black or African American learners by 2024, 2025. And there's been a lot of changes. First of all, we understand that the pandemic has really changed significantly what we're doing here in terms of those support services that we have, both to attract new learners to the college and then also support those learners throughout their time at Pima. And I want to kind of frame just a couple of things that our chancellor talks about quite a bit in terms of the context of these plans. One is that we are really we're really at a critical moment in our history. Our chancellor talks about two curves, right? The industrial curve and then this digital curve. And we're really at a transition point now, both in the workplace, in the world, and then, of course, at Pima. And I want to share with you some pretty alarming statistics, and this comes out of Ron Schutman, the Arizona Board of Regents, that only 17 of every 100 ninth graders in Arizona are going to have a bachelor's degree in 10 years. And so we understand that we need to change this dynamic. Also, the landscape of higher education is radically changing. There are now over 1 million credentials that are out there, in addition to degrees and certificates. Traditional higher education is now being impacted by a lot of new competitors. There's about 5,000 colleges and universities throughout the United States, but there are 55,000 providers of credentials now. So we're entering a very different time. Also, we have a number of gaps that we're really focusing on addressing, and I want to just mention a couple of the gaps. First, the educational achievement gap. And I want to share some statistics why it is so important for us to increase the completers in our community of learners of color and members of our community of color. By 2023, more than half of the existing workforce and all of the net new workforce growth will be made up of people of color. And then by 2032, most workers without a 4-year degree will be people of color. And so really, I think the future, not just of Tucson and of Arizona, but the future of our nation really is dependent on us addressing the achievement gaps. And that's an important part of our plan. The other, I think, gap I really want to address is the skills gap. And we know that there continues to be a disconnect between those high-wage, high-skill positions that are in southern Arizona and workers that can fill those. And so our centers of excellence are really pivotal to this strategic enrollment plan. And we've actually seen enrollment in our centers of excellence. Those are the areas where we're seeing increases in enrollment. And those centers are designed to address these skills gaps throughout our region. And so that's going to be another important thing in terms of relevancy. And we're really committed to ensuring that our curriculum is relevant, that it moves at the speed of industry, and that we're also flexible and adaptable to the changes. But what's going to permeate everything we do moving over the next 5 years is really going to be our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And I think that's absolutely important. And we want to ensure that Pima Community College is here for every single member of this community. And our definition of learners has expanded. We educate what we now call the new majority learner. And that really is a learner. We are, and you're going to hear today, we're very focused on our K-12 pipeline, and we will continue. We've increased dramatically our resources because we want to get more of those K-12 students into Pima. We're growing our dual enrollment. But this plan really is a holistic plan that's looking at a whole new population of learners, what we call working learners and learning workers. And so you're going to see, I think, a lot of innovation in this plan in terms of serving our community. So I want to thank, particularly, I want to express my gratitude to David Ariano, who has really been the point person that's been leading all of this, but he's had a whole team behind him. But David, thank you so much for all the work that you've done. And then on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Strategic Plan, I really want to acknowledge Hilda Latner, who is the point person on this. And so again, these plans really, I think, are really an intersectionality of what we're going to be doing over the next 5 years. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to David.
All right, thank you, Dr. Duray. And so, to begin, I'm going to give you some overview, some context behind that strategic enrollment management plan, but also highlight some of those opportunities that we have here at Pima. And so, you've heard David, Dr. Duray talk about some of those gaps that we are experiencing. We also have a lot of external forces that are impacting higher education and Pima Community College. And we're all familiar with the pandemic. The pandemic has caused drastic change on our lives, the way we do things. Many people in our community are still dealing with fear, uncertainty, and personal loss. Even when we transitioned to a virtual environment, many of our learners had to sit out. And we also have changes in the way we learn, in the way we teach, in the way that we provide services. But at the same time, we also have changes in our competition. We have increased competition from our four-year universities, from our for-profit colleges. Our value proposition of low cost and access are being challenged every day. We also have an economy that is rapidly changing. We have political divisiveness. We have social inequities continuing to increase. And you kind of get where I'm going with this. We have a lot of challenges. And our community, our learners, and Pima are not immune to those challenges. Those forces do impact the way we provide services to our community. I want to step back and take a look from a national perspective. And on this particular chart, you can see community colleges across the country have experienced the steepest declines in enrollment at nearly 15% these last 2 years. That's compared to other institution types. The other piece to this is that many of these institutions were already experiencing enrollment declines since the end of the Great Recession in 2010, 2011. And so we have two different forces impacting community colleges. Looking at this from a local or state perspective, during that same time period, you could see that many of the Arizona community colleges experienced enrollment declines as well. I'm going to note there's some outliers there, and they have some commonalities. One being that they're rural. They're serving smaller population bases. They were able to use CARES and HERF funding to significantly subsidize the cost of tuition. And I think more importantly, they continue to receive state funding compared to Maricopa and Pima Community Colleges. So we've gone through many challenges, and it's not all doom and gloom because there's great opportunity. When we look at enrollment projections, we can see there's projected enrollment growth in our region. And so this strategic enrollment management plan is really going to help us capture that, but also help us weather and endure those projected enrollment declines that are anticipated at the end of this decade. And so it's really important that Pima Community College has a strong plan that will really support our community for a long time coming. And with that strong plan, we have a really strong goal for the institution. We want to increase headcount annually by 4%. That's roughly 7,000 more learners than we're serving today. But at the same time, we also need to have increases in our persistence in helping students complete their programs, how we retain students, and finally, doubling our completer counts, as you heard Dr. Duray mention. So we have a lot of big, ambitious goals, but these are really obtainable for the institution. But we're not going to be able to do that without focusing on our learners. Our learner pipelines are so crucial to us. We need to be able to be flexible and adapt to their different needs, their different characteristics, at the macro and at the individual level. We need to be able to serve all of our learners, no matter where they come from, in the best way possible. And that's what the strategic enrollment plan sets out to do. At the same time, we also need to prioritize what we do for our learners. From the very concept of I'm going to college, to applying to the institution, to supporting them while they're here in the program and getting them to the right resources, to helping them cross that finish line and complete their program or credential, and also getting them back into the institution, reskilling them, making sure that they get the skills necessary to move forward in their life. Taking a step back, I do want to, again, acknowledge our SEMP team and all the work that they've done. Our planning process for this enrollment management plan has been very rigorous. We've gone through multiple phases. It's a recursive and continuous process. These are things that we're going to be coming back to at the macro level and at the micro level. We're also knowing that this is a living document, a living plan for the institution, and it's going to change over time as things in our community change, as the community gives us feedback. And it's so important as we are in this phase 3 of our planning process that we get your feedback, your rich perspectives, your position on some of the challenges that we face, the gaps in our community. We need your input, your voice, and it's so important. It's a cornerstone of all the things we do here at Pima Community College, and that's that collaboration, that partnership. So I'm stressing the importance of that. And finally, we look forward, and this event helps pave the way for our future, making sure we get that feedback incorporated into our strategies. A lot of our strategies are ongoing. We're going to be incorporating that feedback as we go. As I mentioned, it's a recursive process. We will keep visiting this. This isn't the only time we will get your feedback. And so it's so important as we move forward today that we have these rich discussions. And so we appreciate all of you being here. And with that, I'm going to wrap up and hand it over to my colleague, Hilda Ladner, who's going to talk about our diversity, equity, and inclusion plans. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Let's wait for our plan to come up. I'm going to be rather brief. I want us to spend most of our time together here today really discussing what's in our different plans. And so I just want to set a little bit of context for our DEI strategy and the priorities that came up. So first I'll just say, there are many employees here, so many of you know who we are. But we are a Hispanic Serving institution and a Minority Serving institution. We serve, all of this area of southern Arizona, and that serving piece is really key and important to our DEI strategic plan. Hispanic Serving means that you serve at least 25% of your enrollment identifies as Hispanic or Latinx, and for us, that's 48%. More than half of our students identify as members of a minoritized or marginalized group. We serve older than average learners, so the average age of our learner is 28. And a large number of our students come from lower income backgrounds. So these are important framing pieces about who we are as an institution. And so in considering our plan, we really looked at, diversity. Pima Community College is already really diverse. Many colleges across the country are really working towards achieving more diversity, more students of color coming to their institutions, greater number of staff that are representative of those students. And for us, we really are aligned well with the demographics of Southern Arizona and Tucson. Our employee groups are really diverse almost at every level. One of the things that we continue to be challenged by is in recruitment of diverse faculty, and that's something that we're continuing to try to address. The next piece is around equity, and that's really about access and looking at our system, looking at disaggregated data about the various student populations that we serve to ensure that they are all experiencing Pima in a way that allows them to be successful, to feel like they belong at Pima, and that they have access not just through our enrollment process coming into the institution, but through our programs through completion. So addressing those gaps in access through our programs. And then the last piece is inclusion, and that's really about sense of belonging, creating a climate that provides resources, that really looks at all of our policies and practices to see how they impact various learners across our institution. So for the strategic plan and what you're seeing, the framing of today, I wanted to say that this is our second DEI strategic plan. My office was created by that first plan that ran from 2017 through 2020. So that really just established the office and the beginnings of a structure. It focused really on diversity and increasing cultural competencies across our institution, and really allowed for Pima to respond to the pandemic and social unrest, because we had already begun down that road of having these conversations, thinking about our learners and how we serve our various communities. So over the last couple of years, we've really worked on a framework for this new plan, conducted a climate assessment, and held a number of community conversations to establish our priorities. So just quickly, this plan was the work of a representative team of about 25 people from across our institution from many areas of Pima Community College, including employees and students. We worked together from last fall through early this month to establish these priorities. We really looked at student and employee data and representation, retention and completion. We looked at some of our national best practices across community colleges and residential four-year institutions. We conducted a climate survey. We completed a campus pride index, which looks at the climate and culture for LGBTQIA2S+ community. And then we looked at the recommendations from our climate assessment team to develop these strategies. And so these are just some examples. We looked at our different dashboards. If you hadn't had the opportunity to look through some of these dashboards on our website, they tell you a lot about the composition of our college and how we're doing as far as student enrollment and retention. This one is our human resources, and this is specific, I pulled out what it looks like for our faculty, which is what I said is where we are continuing to be challenged. And so keeping an eye on this data is really important for us to, again, disaggregate, look at all of the different groups, see where we need to make changes to make sure that we're meeting key performance indicators across our SENT plan, across our strategic plan that looks at our entire college. We also held a number of community conversations during the pandemic. Most of these were held virtually, inviting people from throughout the community in specific identity communities to help give us feedback about what PIMA is doing, how we're doing, and how we're serving the community. And then a big piece that informed, the data that informed our strategic priorities is this climate assessment that we conducted last year and then really looked at the data. And a lot of what, I'm gonna share a little bit about what it told us. So first, everyone considered that leadership thinks diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, and that it is a priority for us to narrow these success gaps. So that's part of what we looked at. If we looked at sense of belonging, you can see on these charts that sense of belonging is pretty positive across our college. The blue represents our students feeling valued, recognized, and a sense of community. The orange is faculty, so we can see that there's a little bit of a gap there, and we need to think about the climate for faculty. And then the gray is staff. We also saw that 60% of people that responded to the survey hadn't participated in an activity related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that for students, that's even higher. So another piece to think about. And then we pulled out and disaggregated data a little bit further to try to understand where gaps might exist for different parts of our community. And these are some examples of sense of belonging for our Black and African American members of our community. You can see that gaps exist across the various elements of belonging. This is what some of it looks like for our LGBTQIA2S+ community. And you can see again, in a sense of belonging on that side, there are some gaps that exist, especially for those that identify as non-binary or gender non-conforming. And then the chart on this side looks at perceptions of or experiences about having to hide an aspect of your identity to feel like you belong, or that you don't feel as much sense of community at the college. And then these are some of our findings around access and disability. And again, you can see where gaps exist for sense of belonging and for feelings of isolation and how you're experiencing the college. So all of these different pieces really led to our discussions that we had with our group of folks from across the college and the development of these different priorities. So these are the 4 areas that we really think will help us in addressing sense of belonging, which is going to be key for us moving forward here as an institution. So the first one is around continuing with our work and expanding on the work of employee development. The second one is around campus climate and culture, and so really looking at retention for employees and students at the college. The third is, sorry, I'm looking a little further away. The first one is around institutional structure, and the institutional structure is really making DEI everyone's everyday work. And so looking at making sure that there's representation from across the college in each unit that works with a team that brings diversity into that team, thinks about what are the college priorities, and then takes it back out into their unit, focuses on assessment, looks at the various ways that diversity is coming and pulling it out of those silos where it's happening well, and pulling in people that maybe haven't had the capacity to really focus in on this work. The second one is around employee development. The third is addressing the climate and culture at the college. And the fourth is around academic equity and student success. So a lot of these things are already on their way, happening in various areas across the college. And I think what this plan really does is bring it together, help us to address it in a cohesive manner with expertise behind the work so that it is happening well across the college and everyone understands their role in doing this work. So I will stop there so that you can look at the details and have those discussions at the table. And as we go into our discussions here and online, we're going to shift over to just our table discussions, and I'm going to tell you what tables are discussing which topics. But first, I just want to thank everyone that's online right now. We are going to go ahead and veer off, stop our share out to our online colleagues, and they're going to have their discussions there with the people in the Zoom room and in breakout sessions, and have your conversations there, and then report outs as part of that Zoom link. And here in the room, we're going to do that live. So you have your tables and facilitators and scribes at each table. And I'm just going to tell you here in this room who's discussing which pieces. So let's see, we don't have anybody at table number 1. Folks were a little shy about getting up to the front of the room. So at table 3, we have Ken Chavez as our facilitator, and that group will be discussing priorities 4 on the strategic plan, enrollment plan, and on the DEI plan. Table 5, right behind them, Suzanne Desjardins is the facilitator, and you will be discussing priority 5 and priority 1 on the DEI priorities. Table 6 is being facilitated by Tina Neal, and they will be discussing priorities 1 on the SEMP and 2 on the DEI strategic plan. Table number 7 is being facilitated by Jennifer. Is that table? Jennifer Madrid. Hi, Jennifer. And that table is going to be discussing priorities 2 on each of the plan. Table number 8 is Amanda Abens is facilitating that table, and you will be discussing priorities 3 on each of the plans. Table number 9 is being facilitated by Yolanda Gonzalez, and you will be discussing priorities 4 on each of the plans. And table number 10 is David Dondowitz, and you are discussing priority 5 on the SEMP and priority 1 on the diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. All right, so your discussions, we have an hour to do this, and then we're going to be reporting back. So make sure you have a scribe and you pick a reporter to tell us what your discussions were like. Thank you all. Hi, everyone. Just a couple minutes to please wrap up. Think about what you're going to report out. We're going to ask you to report out top 3 things from each of the plans that you would like to share out with the group. So for our online folks, same thing. Please start to wrap up, and we will start distributing microphones so that we can report out. Thank you so much. So we have about 20 minutes. Wait, no, we have an hour. We have some time to report out. So we are going to start with Suzanne's group. So if you could share the top 3 things that you discussed, most relevant from your conversation about each of the plans, please.
Hi, everyone. So we were looking at SEMP priority number 5 and DEI priority number 1. And I'm actually going to probably do more than 3. I hope that's okay. Because we had our chancellor at our table, so we got to give some shout out to some of his ideas too. We got to make sure we include them. But what we talked about under SEMP was the work of the foundation. And some of the things that they're already doing in the foundation are when students graduate, they're sending out flyers immediately to them to try to engage them to join the alumni network. And that was one of the strategies under ours on number 5 for SEMP. How do we strengthen that alumni network? How do we use that as a mechanism to expand apprenticeship opportunities, job shadowing opportunities, how to really expand beyond career and technical education, but looking at transfer pathways using a network of alumni to actually be spokespersons for the schools that beyond PIMA, the other representatives that they, other university partners that we have, that they may have attended those schools. How can we start doing that? We also talked about the Vail school district has something called the Senior Exit Project, and how can we do something like that? And what that project is when students are seniors, they're actually told, I understand, when they enroll in high school at a Vail school, when they're freshmen, they're told you will not graduate with your diploma unless you do a Senior Exit Project. And what it actually does is, what they're actually asked to do is an immersive experience where they volunteer and do a shadowing of what career field do they think they want to go into, and it really helps them to, and usually a lot of them, I guess, do it over the summer before their senior year, but they can do it at any time their senior year. And then they have to present a capstone. They have to present to a community board. I got to be a judge on one of them, so it was really fun. So they get graded on it. It's not like you just do it and somebody checks the box. They have to write a paper, they have to do a presentation, they get graded, and that completes their graduation requirements along with all their other grades for the year. But what a lot of them find out by doing that project is, what are the classes that I need to take? What do I need to major in? How much is school gonna cost? Do I actually wanna do this for a living? And so we were talking about, how can we do something like that? How can we start strengthening even from an early age? And our chancellor shared some of the places that he's been. European model of education actually talks about planting these seeds early on, like 5th grade, middle school. How do we really get in early on to help students see what can they become? How do we help them to visualize education as that mechanism to becoming successful? So again, ours did have some components of apprenticeship and career and technical, but then we said it actually bleeds over to transfer as well, because so many, as we heard the statistics, if only 17 students right now that are freshmen are actually going to earn bachelor's degrees, that's projected based on statistics, that's abysmal. That's not acceptable. We have to make sure that we're strengthening pathways to the baccalaureate. And again, through career and technical education, we can do that with the 2+2 contracts that we have in place, articulation agreements, and beyond. So we talked a lot about those things. We also talked about how to do more with tours. And so the chancellor shared something called digital twinning technology, which allows you to immerse yourself in an experience where you would not have to physically travel to a location. So let's say you wanted to visit the Health Professions COE, Center of Excellence, and you did not want to drive to West Campus and try to figure out how to get a tour of the space. There's technology that would actually be available to have students experience what it might be like to work in a field in healthcare, a classroom type of experience, a didactic kind of experience, and how can we do more with that? And our marketing team is already looking at expanding virtual tour options. So that was something we talked about as well. Being more intentional with our four-year partners on articulation agreements, having billboards, having the presidents and leaders of the institutions, our chancellor shaking hands, welcoming students to enroll in both. How do we do more data sharing so that if students are enrolling or trying to be admitted to one of our university partners, they're automatically admitted to PIMA? And how do we work through some of that so that students are not told no, they're told yes? We also talked about our foundation strengthening, more scholarship opportunities for students so that they could actually be funded while they're at PIMA and promise to keep on going to a four-year degree at a particular school of their choice. How do we strengthen that? On the DEI side, switching over, again, we had priority 1. We wanted to make sure that the DEI objectives are actually embedded in folks' jobs descriptions. So we actually looked at, that one talked about how do we make sure like 10% of a person's job is actually spent on DEI. And we actually said, what if we took more of a universal design approach and we said up front, everyone's job is DEI, rather than break out a percentage. And regardless of role, including even our adjunct faculty, how do we kind of set that expectation that everyone's job is going to be helping our students and recognizing different ways and best practices to do that, students that are coming from different population groups and may have different needs, so the universal design approach. We also talked about expanding upon trauma-informed pedagogy, which we know the TLC has already done some sessions, but how do we start doing more with that and all of the different roles, making sure that the equity initiatives are clearly articulated in unit planning, making sure that relationships between our students with one another and with our employees continue to be strengthened. Again, using best practices that talk about different ways to do that, and normalizing interventions. So when we are doing outreach to students who may be struggling, we actually do the same outreach to everyone because everyone can benefit from intervention strategies. So that in a nutshell is ours. Thank you.
Van. Now we'll go over to Ken's table. I think Michelle is reporting out.
Hello, I'm Michelle Higgins, and I'm from the University of Arizona Societal Impact. And so just really happy to be here and part of this conversation. We had the SEMP number 4 as well as DEI number 4, and I'll start with the SEMP. So we really talked a lot about increasing the sense of belonging for learners here on campus, and we had a lot of discussion around a couple of things. One is family. What can we do to preserve that piece of their identity so it's not for somebody who's like my age, who thinks like, oh, I have my family responsibilities, and then over here I have my education, right? Because then that sort of fractures my identity, my sense of belonging, and so we didn't really have any strong recommendations for this, but that's something that maybe needs to be thought through of how can we preserve the identity that they bring and create belongingness around that. We also talked a little bit about the HIPs, the high impact practices around like what has been working for first year students and how can that work for students who are returning? What is it that can transfer? And so one of the things we talked about was the first year interest groups and thinking about how do we build that into students who are coming to campus later in life? What are their interests? How can they see past some of the kind of required courses if they're just really interested to improve their career? And build that in early. So we thought number 7 was important. Redefining completion, including clarification and capturing learner intent. We talked a lot about redefining competencies and what that looks like, and making it more learner-centered, and understanding what the learner is coming to this campus for, and building competencies around that instead of just having sort of standard traditional competencies that applies to every single learner. Define faculty advising and how to support learners at PCC. We had a discussion around increasing sort of cultural competencies around for faculty, but not just piling on another layer. Like how can that be done we didn't talk about that piece, but just understanding that it's beneficial to the learners if faculty understand those non-cognitive pulls that students enter into the learning space with, and we don't often address those or bring those into perspective, especially when they're in like the STEM classes. We think of those as being, oh, there's no culture in this classroom, we're just learning math, we're just learning science, and not recognizing all of those cultural things that students and learners walk in with. So that was for SEMP. And then for diversity, for number 4, let's see. What does this say? Ryan? Coax the work. Coach.
Connection.
Oh, connection. Connect the work of NCII design team with the work I think that's being done in curricular development. We thought that was really important because we know there's so much research out there on what works, but what is the mechanisms or the channels that goes from that research into what we do on a daily basis in our classroom? And that's we thought that was kind of the basis for the other ideas that were on for number 4, including expand teach and learn center support for certificates and professional development for faculty on culturally relevant pedagogy. That if we know what should be put into the curriculum, then we should have the faculty knowing that as well. But one of the things we talked about was not feeling or not approaching this from a deficit perspective of whether or not you have these certifications or professional development as faculty, but you get to earn a badge for it. And for the classes or the courses that you teach or things that you're involved with, you can have a badge there that says that you're building in these culturally responsive approaches to your teaching and your curriculum. And I just think, like, as a student, if I saw that, it would be like, heck yeah, I want to take that teacher, I want to take that class. Or, you know, you can put it into your social media, on your resume, things like that. I think that's it. And we said yes to number 2. Yes, that should just be a yes. Please fund it permanently. All right,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you, Michelle. Let's see. I think the microphone is at Amanda's table, yes? Oh, wait. I guess it's at Ken's table. Ken.
Okay.
Other Ken.
All right. So we really didn't answer our question. Well, see, this is me being vulnerable right now, right? We actually had a community member who I don't want to say took over, but he gave us some insight. You know, one of the things that I think we should always try to do is not always talk to people that agree with everything that we do, but also talk to the community members that have suggestions or might oppose certain things. So it gave us an opportunity to hear them out, but it also gave us an opportunity to share some of the data, some of the information, which I think a lot of times if they don't have access to certain people at Pima, they're gonna create these own narratives in their mind of what's going on. So us being able to show the data, the information, I think was helpful. And I think he left here with a positive sense of what we're doing. And I've been here at Pima for over 25 years, and I can tell you from my personal experience, we are in probably the best place we've ever been as far as how we're approaching situations and issues. So just 3 things that he brought up that I think were something that we thought could be pursued is one of them was just a campus location or resource safe zone for LGBTQ centers, so something to that effect where people can go and feel safe. Also, he mentioned he was here a long time ago, and we used to have these fun activities, right? We had a turkey trot, we had different things that not only brought students, employees, but also brought the community. And he mentioned how we can include the community in a lot of the fun things that we're doing at being a community college, and he really emphasized the community part of it, but partnering, creating the conditions and spaces where we could have these conversations so they don't come up with these stories that might not be the whole truth. So that was the second thing. And then the last thing is just including in the curriculum the culturally relevant pedagogies, lifestyles that need to lifestyles and programs that are relevant to student needs. So he had a lot of good suggestions, and he was here a long time ago and remembered how we did things at Pima, and all of us know that we're not moving in the same direction we were back then. There's a lot of new things that have happened, but from my experience, I think, you know, people want to be seen, heard, and valued, and it's important that we give opportunities, and not just our students access, but the community access to us to ask them tough questions. That's all.
All right, thanks, Edgar. Thanks for being vulnerable and for sharing. It is important for us to hear from our community members and provide information out, but also listen to concerns. There's always value in, you know, the perspectives that are out there, regardless of how we might be experiencing something internally. Okay, I think next is Tina's table. Crispin.
Thank you. I'm Crispin Jeffrey Franco. I serve as the Director of Business Development and Engagement. So we had SEMP priority number 1. And what we really focused in on is the idea that a lot of these action or these strategies include the word increase, but we know we're not going to increase staffing in all these areas in order to actually be able to increase those activities. So as a point of reference, number 13, we have 1 FTE dedicated to serving our 16 to 24-year-olds who are not connected with school and or work. So what can we do as a college to make sure that that one FTE plus all of the other strategies that are listed are being kind of shared responsibilities, and that we're collectively all taking a role in increasing those activities, and we're not only relying on the team whose day-to-day charge is that specific function, but how do we actually all take some ownership and accountability to increase those activities to lead to greater enrollment. On question number 4, we really talked about challenging the orthodoxy around college readiness and taking a look at the barriers we put in place towards entering specific programs, and really asking ourselves, do they need to be there? And are there ways that we can break down some of those barriers to make access easier, which is something that happens on the non-credit side, but maybe there's an opportunity to scale some of that work to some of our credit programs and really make access truly easier where it can be. We also talked about, so we've heard quite a bit about, that's on the DEI side. Also under number 4, we talked a lot about the length of course and meeting employer needs. So, across the institution, 16 weeks is really the standard for the duration of a course. But again, asking ourselves, does it need to be 16 weeks? Does it need to start in January? Does it need to start in September or August? Can we start and finish courses at different times with different lengths to meet employer and workforce needs, but also the needs of adult and working learners? Right? If an adult student is going to take time away from work to get back into education, it's easier for them to do that if it's a 4, 5, or 6 week commitment, as opposed to 16 weeks where they have to make a harder decision about decreased wages that might go to support their family. So really challenging ourselves to think about, is 16 weeks the only way to do this, or can we actually do this differently to better meet the needs of our community? Overall, we really talked about keeping the community informed of changes at the college. One of the things we talked about was, question number 3 on number 1 about micro-credentials. This table is going to be biased, and we're going to say yes. And we'll own that bias. We recognize it. We admit it. But yes, those programs are important to our community. But how do we, as a college, make sure that we are communicating effectively to our student population and our potential student population? There's more opportunities to get the skilling and the education that you're looking for, that other than the traditional pathways. But then how do we also communicate to the community the value of having those programs that may not directly lead to a certificate or degree at the completion of that first step, but ultimately can and will over time? And how do we make sure that the community knows that, yes, degree and certificate and transfer programs are important to the college, but there's other ways that we can make an impact and show the value of those other opportunities across the community. Moving to the DEI, we had priority number 2, and we really talked about, so the culturally relevant component of pedagogy came up multiple times already, and at our table we believe that culturally relevant and effective is maybe a way to rephrase that and look at as we kind of define what these goals are, making sure that yes, they're culturally relevant additions to our training, but that there's some measure of effectiveness that goes into that. We talked about standardizing DEI and ADR messaging in classrooms and in workspaces, so that the onus isn't always on the manager or the faculty member to make sure that they're communicating the importance and the availability and access to those resources. So, something like a video that a faculty or an instructor could play at the start of class, on the first day of class, so that all students receive the same level of messaging around those resources. Expanding safe space training, so, really making sure that we have areas where employees can go and practice the new skills and the new communication tools that they're learning through all of these trainings, and that, the first time we use those new skills aren't always with students and or employees or colleagues, that we have a place we can go and kind of really put to practice what we've learned through those trainings, and making sure that across the college we keep in mind that or build a culture around DEI starts with me, and making sure that we have ways for each employee to really own those efforts. And I think one of the other tables already said it, making that a requirement of every employee at the college, not just the ones that are on a task force. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think Jennifer Stable has the microphone now.
My name's Doug Pryer, and I teach chemistry at the West Campus. And we had a real energetic conversation between us here. And I'm going to try to relay some of that. We had priority number 2 on the first one, which is dealing with college transitioning, onboarding, and enrollment processes for all learners. And this one's real close to my heart. We spent a lot of time discussing how we need to invest time up front in each student to take time and not to rush the process, because students can feel that if we rush it. And to me, it's real important to personalize my interaction with each student as much as possible. To repeat those messages, not just the first day, because students can easily say, well, he's just saying that, because it's a feel-good message. And it needs to be something that the students know that that's part of who I am, and that's important to me. So that kind of message needs to be repeated throughout the semester. We need to enforce the message by reaching out to each student individually. And, well, I'll get into something else related to that in a short time. Getting to know each student, learn something new with each interaction, meeting, or appointment with each student, and to follow up each subsequent conversation with a check-in based on previous interaction. So if I can interact with my students, and if I build upon that during the semester, they know that I know who they are, and that is more important. And in doing that, I'm better able to teach my subject to them. And that's the feedback that I get at the end of the semester usually. We want to create training to support staff and advisors with how to have impactful conversations with students and to learn their personal stories. And as we all know, if we're instructors, and probably if we interact with students in any way, everybody has a personal story, and if we can interact and relate to that, that enhances our ability to interact with the student as an instructor. How can PCC better share information about enrollment and registration? Faculty can share the information in the classroom through word of mouth and positive experience. If I come across to my students as somebody who cares about them, then I think that that's going to get out through my students to people that they know. That's just a normal route. Provide PCC information at Tucson Welcome Centers and agencies, like the museums. Information, I'm just reading notes here that Jennifer took for us. Information at universities for students who are not in-state residents. PCC is an affordable option while gaining in-state residency, especially compared, as we know, to U of A. Plant a seed about college with high school students and middle school students. And point 3, how can PCC better serve learners in person and virtually? Two of us were real strong on this point of view, that virtual just doesn't come close to in-person interaction, no matter what's done. At least that was our feeling. To tackle the challenge of connecting with students virtually, we can engage students who may be struggling and being alone by providing as much interaction as possible. And again, it goes back to interacting personally with your students, whether it's virtually or in person. To highlight small accomplishments of each phase or completion of a task. And we need to tailor our messaging so it is encouraging and effective. And finally, point 4, we felt that PCC is doing a real good job. Advisors manage their time and ensure that they are giving each student the individual time that they need. We need to empower students, provide information, and empower them to make their own decisions, and to pair students together, sometimes in groups of just 2 or maybe 3 or 4, because that interaction between individual students helps them feel useful and appreciated, I think. And it helps them grow in the class. And we need to focus on the geography of Tucson and to focus more energy on areas of underserved populations that need more attention, outreach, and college guidance. And on DEI, we had priority 2 also, and we answered yes to the first question. Increase effort of integrating students who might be feeling isolated. Be aware and what? Sensitive. And be aware and be sensitive, I'm sorry. Number 2, training for all faculty and staff on culturally relevant pedagogy and social justice issues. Promote meaningful conversations and safe spaces for students to talk and share about how they're feeling. Disability, social justice must include universal design, especially in our new centers of excellence, so that disability access is expected and incorporated into design for all, not just disabled students. And I guess we see that, I see that mostly when I get messages from the ADR Center about how to compensate for people who may have ADR needs. Number 3, we hope that we have a sensitive administration. We must identify and understand what our students are going through and say something. And again, that comes from building the interaction all throughout the semester, and to not be afraid to address issues or concerns. I know in my own class, on the first day, I tell the students, I give them my home phone number, and I tell them, if they have problems, call me. And I usually don't get very many calls, but I repeat that so that they know if they want to reach out to me, I'm available, no matter what time of day it is. Don't expect that a student is going to do well in class. Wait, don't expect that a student that is doing, just because a student starts out well doesn't mean that the student is going to finish well. So we have to, by maintaining interaction with them, hopefully ensure that when they started out well, that indeed they will finish well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we have the microphone at Amanda's table.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Denise Hernandez de Ortiz. My pronouns are she, her, ella. And I am from the Cradle to Career Partnership anchored at the United Way of Tucson in Southern Arizona. And also, I must add, a former Pima Community College alumna. Here at the table, I had the pleasure of working with my colleagues on priority number 3, which is to increase academic, financial, and basic needs support for all learners. Some of the ideas that we had regarding how Pima can bridge some of these opportunity gaps is to provide mental health support to students, as well as childcare. Some of the people at the table mentioned that they themselves, when they were in school, would have benefited from childcare. And we discussed how some parents, specifically the ones that go to school at night, struggle to find childcare. And we had a larger discussion about quality childcare as well. And to include more ages in that support, because currently the focus is birth to 5. But there's many children, 7, 9, 11, that also need that support. We also mentioned that greater focus needs to be around not only increasing access, but increasing awareness to the current supports that exist, because a lot of these resources go untouched. So creating additional awareness about how PIMA is trying to offer wraparound supports for these basic needs is important. Another thing that we highlighted in our conversation is that now, because of the digital equity, technology is no longer a luxury, it's a must. Everybody needs access to technology. Also, debt forgiveness is important with inflation. And a lot of people are struggling, so it was mentioned at our table that that would be really helpful. In thinking of that, transportation was also mentioned, and financial literacy, and I think now we can move on to the DEI priority area, which we had number 3 as well, regarding campus climate and culture. There are several actions listed, all of which we said yes to. We find them all to be important. We couldn't decide which one was more important than the other, but one of the things that we did discuss is that there's a lot of populations that PCC is trying to reach out to and highlight. And so one of the ideas we had at this table is that we need to include their voices as well. Create a dynamic feedback loop with them. Ask them how PIMA can honor them and their experiences, and bring that to the table when creating solutions, so that they can be co-empowered and bring their expertise in that process. Another big thing that we mentioned is that there's several populations missing in this plan, and some of the ones that we mentioned is the need to make more visible the efforts toward helping older students, veterans, and learners with disabilities. We mentioned that in the DEI conversations, many times a population that gets overlooked is people with disabilities, so it would be wonderful to be able to offer those cultural spaces at each of the campuses. That includes people with disabilities as well. Oh, and we also mentioned the need to create job and post-secondary pathways for students that are undocumented. Overall, one big learning that we had at our table was that learners come to us with strengths, and it is institutions that have barriers, and we need to work together to remove them. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Let's see, where is the microphone? Is it over at Yolanda's table?
Hi everyone, I'm Carolina Silva, pronouns she, hers, ella, and I'm with Scholarships AZ. Our priority was number 4, support and increase the persistence, retention, completion, and learning and success of all learners. And we started by talking about the sense of belonging in higher ed, as well as what unintended barriers learners experience. And one of the first things that was shared by folks here who are alumni was the importance of having events and different not just events, but also visibility about different perspectives on campus. So whether it's like forums, community events, I know y'all do a number of events regarding different Cultural Awareness Month. Another thing that definitely came up was, the fact that PIMA is a institution that a lot of students of color, first-gen students want to attend, but sometimes they may struggle to afford tuition. For instance, undocumented students don't have access to in-state, so that was certainly one population that came to mind. Thank you, Yolanda. And then we did talk about, right, like what are the good things? What bring folks to PIMA? Because there's certainly a lot of things, and one of those is the fact that offerings are larger in terms of the coursework. And then although you can almost pursue any major here, right? If you transfer, sometimes your credits won't be taken as they should be at the U of A, for instance. So some students might find themselves redoing up to a semester of coursework. So really what this brought us to, how do we solidify those pathways, right? So there's more direct transfer courses. And I think, yeah, go ahead. On that conversation also, how can the college create more flexible and holistic pathways so that students who are transferring can look at the course catalog and see that transparently, like this will transfer to my major, this will be an elective, this will not transfer, but maybe you want to take it, for fun, because I would. And then, of course, thinking about how do we make those resources and support for students accessible across pathways, right? So whether you're here to transfer, whether you're here for an AA, whether you're here for a certificate, right? All of those are super viable pathways, and knowing what direct resources you have, as well as increasing the holistic support that folks experience. And one of the things we talked about, because I was a little shocked that PIMA doesn't have mandatory advising. So all of us at the table said yes, that would probably be beneficial, and we know that would create more of a load on advisors, but I think it will be helpful for folks to have that direct thing, because sometimes, right, transferring those requirements are beyond, right, like I would say, decision making of PIMA. So I think it is up to us to create those spaces and opportunities for advisors to communicate that with their students. Cool. And then some more things that we discussed in terms of priorities for the recommended strategies, or things that weren't here. I know one that came up was open educational resources. Also, ensuring advisors are up to date on course changes, right? So those things can be communicated. And lastly, and this is, of course, right, just beyond planning, something we've seen a lot with our students who are attending PIMA is just having constant anxiety about what they're going to do after, and changing majors a lot of times. So how do we navigate post-degree pathways with students in ways that are open and flexible? Because I think we all know the workforce is changing, right? Higher ed landscape is changing, and it's going to continue to, yet our students are kind of remain fixated of if I study this, how will I make sure to find a job after in this? And sometimes it's about ensuring them and, bringing spaces for alumni to talk about what they did and how they navigated the post-degree pathway. Cool. Yeah, we can move on. And then in terms of just which of these priorities really stood out to us from the recommended strategies, the one we spoke to the most was provide innovative cost reduction strategies for all learners. I think that's why we're here today, right? Enrollment, and we've seen this across the nation with the pandemic, but really talking about how do we bring up different strategies. And we talked about this in terms of not just internships, or are there positions on campus where students could work for a set number of hours a week and then they receive a tuition waiver or a partial tuition waiver. I share that my undergraduate institution, we would take 2 semesters of classes as a full-time student and pass all those classes, and we would get 4 free credits. And it was amazing because I couldn't afford to pay for summer classes, but then I was able to take my summer classes for free as a double major and graduate in 4 years, which is that was my time limit, right? Because I was an undocumented student and I had financial aid for 4 years. So thinking about how do we create alternatives so that folks can get some support in that case. Yes. And then we just said transparency is key in all this, right? How are we communicating to students if we are making these critical changes? And I think I'll move on to the academic and equity student success, which is priority 4 under DEI. And I think we all looked at this list, and I will say number 5 is explore feasibility of offering non-credit skills training to civic activism and engagement. And I thought that was for students. I guess it's for community members. So we were like, oh, well, what if there's a opportunity for students, right, to engage through their classes, maybe in some civic engagement, some service learning, and be able to, receive credit for that, or maybe even have compensation for that, because I think that, right, is also an amazing way for students to connect with community and kind of leverage those resources of the experience they can gain. I think we all agree that number 4 was really critical, support equity and guided pathways work to ensure that marginalized and minoritized learners have access to and through educational pathways, because while we agree that all the priorities are important, most of them are very college-wide, and we thought it is also important that each particular program has, you know, strategies in place to support their students, right? So if we know that students of color are really struggling in pre-nursing, there's something that group can do about that. Or if we know that most students of, you know, vulnerable populations are in the social sciences and there's like 80%, but they have fewer number of like counselors, like something should be done about that. There should be, I would say, an equity assessment there to begin with. But yeah, what else do we have? Oh yes, and this is where the OER, Open Educational Resources, came up, because we agreed that his textbooks can be very inaccessible for folks, including the software. And yeah, let's go to the last page. I also just had a lot of questions on the DEI stuff, and perhaps this is because I am a community member, but I would love to see how culturally relevant pedagogy and assessment is being operationalized. I would love to see what PD trainers, in fact, are being brought to PIMA, if that is something that is going to happen, which I think is critical. I just want to see more details. I liked what this table shared about culturally relevant and effective. I'm like, yes, that is really wonderful. And then the other questions were in regards to the equity and guided pathways. Where are additional resources needed? Where are the resources going? All of those things are really important. And the last piece, which I think is really critical, are also something that wasn't on these actions, was how is PIMA supporting faculty and staff of color? There's a growing amount of literature out there that shares that women, and especially faculty and staff members of color, are doing all this invisible labor at institutions, right? We all know this. Like, half the people in this room are nodding their heads at me. I know it, because I've been doing it since I was a student, right, at 18. So how do we create resources for them to also feel valued so that they can stay at this institution and continue creating an inclusive climate for all students? And then the very last piece, I think, again, focuses on the communication piece, like what are the resources for our minoritized students? And Anna shared, she graduated in 2015. She knows about, and she's here as staff now, she knows about the resources because she's been here for a while. But how does a student who's working 40 hours, who maybe has a kid, who's only here taking night classes, like, I mean, I'm just spitballing, but is there an app? Is there something that students are like, hey, alert, clothing drive this day. Hey, alert, we're gonna have like a pop-up farmer's market. I don't know. Like, I've seen a lot of institutions do different things so that students have, so if those resources are here, students are told of them, because there's so much going on, and we know students are not always looking for emails as much as they should. Right, as much as I want to believe they do, because we send very thorough emails, but they don't. So yeah, how to create that system of accessibility, particularly for our minoritized students. And yeah, excited to connect with y'all. I think this is all we had.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Carolina. It's good to hear our community perspectives and thinking about all the follow-up conversations that we need to have as well. David's table.
Hello, I'm David Donderwitz. The retention at table 10 was not very good today. We had sent priority number 5 and DEI number 1. So we talked a little bit about the pre-apprenticeships, apprenticeship programs. We really got into looking at maybe getting an inventory of what we currently offer to see how we could identify the gaps, but really looked a lot more and talked more about like the transfer programs and how we can get them into those experiences. But the majority of our conversation we spent on the equitable access to all learners. So Wendy had a nice little graphic here. So looking at more of the services that we offer in addition to our educational training. So being able to help that student navigate to basic needs, social services, job assistance funding, So we really got into that talk. We also talked about childcare as well, helping remove those barriers for students while they come to this institution. We also talked a little bit about our alumni base, but really looking at that alumni base to kind of put back into our current students in regard to tuition, scholarship, stuff of that sort. Oh, yes, please. All right. And then we had our priorities, our 3 priorities that we were asked for here, but really is looking at not just employment, but fostering a sense of belonging for our students from the first time they interact with the institution. So Paul, he has gone or left since, but looking at how we do that front load with our students and connect with those students at the beginning, so we make sure that they're prepared for their education well before the first day of those classes, depending whatever classes that they are that they're taking, so that student's prepared to meet their goal. And then having our partners and that support system in place for that student as they go through the process. All right. And then, again, we had DEI priority 1. So we did talk about there is a lot of tasks on that first priority. So really looking at one to whittle down that task list and maybe specify exactly which areas we want to look at. We also talked about maybe finding that specific area we want to look at to start with, and then we could bring in an external body to kind of look at an assessment. I know we've done the climate survey. And then really one of the things that we saw was missing was needing to include students. I know there was each representative from each area of the college. And then we had more data. And then I think that the thing we had as a goal, and I know this time it's not doable, but ultimately get that DEI plan into the SEMP. So they're one document instead of 2. And that is what we had.
Thank you so much. Great report out. I really appreciate the conversations that happened across all of the tables and look forward to some follow-up items that, we want to have those follow-up conversations. So as we wrap up, I want to invite up our provost for the college to just close it all up for us.
Thank you so much, Hilda. So good morning. Are we still in the morning phase? Yes. Buenos dias. I just would like to thank all of you. I'd like to address our audience, our virtual audience who's joined us today, and our in-person audience. Thank you so much for coming. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I know it's the beginning of many dialogues. So this particular day, we've been talking about the SEMP and also the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Plan. It's taken a long time to get to this point, and I would really like to recognize Hilda Ladner for the DEI plan and also David Arellano for his contribution and leadership. It's been an incredible voyage. But many faculty, staff, and administrators and students were involved in the preparations of these plans. And we need to recognize them as well as several community members. They helped inform the development of the priorities that are included in the plans today. And because we wanted to finalize them, we brought them back to the community for your input and feedback as to see if we're going in the right direction with these approaches. So these are our second phases or second plans, the second SEMP and the second DEI plan. I was part of the first evolution of the DEI plan, and which I think got us started as a foundation to develop the office. We hired our diversity, equity, inclusion officer. We also increased training and awareness about DEI issues and implemented a new faculty hiring framework with Faculty Affairs to put a focus on hiring diverse faculty. We're also leading the DEI climate assessment and the establishment of the Immigrant and Refugee Student Resource Center. So we've come a long ways with the first DEI plan, and now it's time to implement the second phase, and the same with the strategic enrollment management plan. So both of these plans, as Dr. Dure mentioned, it's an intersectionality. They all focus on increasing access, enrollment, completion, and retention of our Latino, African American, Asian American, and Native American learners. And not only to address the workforce needs of our state and our region, but also because it's the socially just thing to do, is to address issues of past exclusion. So I think we've seen a lot of takeaways. For me, some of the takeaways hearing everybody's contributions are that we're looking at college and career. It's not one or the other. So we need to help educate and create an awareness among our community that Pima Community College offers both. Also, focusing not on a deficit model. We talked about it at our table, and I think in your table, Michelle, not a deficit model, but an asset-based model when we're looking at our students and our systems and approaches at the college. Also, trauma-informed pedagogy, culturally relevant pedagogy and effective. And then also making sure that we standardize our messages, that we collaborate with DEI and our ADR messages in the classroom. So those are just tiny ones that takeaways. There are many, many more, and I'm so grateful for all of you who shared that, because we couldn't do this without your presence and your contributions. Also, I'd like to thank the organizers. So I'd like to thank David Arellano, Hilda Ladner, Suzanne Desjardins, Lucy Schubert, Judy Palmer, and Ariana Laguna. Let's give them a round of applause for their help, as well as all of the facilitators and scribes. So thank you for your participation today. And my last thing is I'd like to invite you for lunch. So in the back of the room, we have some boxes for lunch, and you can either join and stay here and continue with the conversation, or if you need to get back to your offices, that's fine too. So muchas gracias. Thank you very, very much. And I hope to see you in further conversations.